Everybody for joining us today. We said we're going to talk about showcasing sustainability through environmental graphics. So today we're going to learn how environmental graphics can really showcase sustainable initiatives in a really friendly and accessible manner. And it's really adding just very simple things that can raise awareness, create excitement, and incite action is really kind of the bottom line here. So our learning objectives today, we really want to encourage user engagement. We want to show methods for integrating graphics, making them feel like they're part of the project to educate and promote, learn some best practices for how you can implement this in your own projects. And then finally, what everybody wants to know is understanding the relative costs for incorporating these graphics into your project. As Jeff mentioned, I'm Jenna and this is Kate, and we'll be walking you through some projects today. So our first project we're going to start talking about is the King Open Cambridge Street and Upper Schools. I thought this quote found on one of the benches right outside of the school was a fitting way to start this presentation today. It's true, we can't make anybody seek out an education, but we can make it easier for them to learn, and that's really the point of environmental graphics. The architecture and the design community has made a lot of strides in recent years in the sustainable building practices and the use of healthy materials. But unfortunately, a lot of these efforts go unnoticed by the general public. So today we're going to explore how relatively simple and expensive graphic additions to a project can really highlight these otherwise invisible efforts.
So just a little bit of background on the project before we start talking about the graphic component of it. This project opened in 2019. It's a net zero school, the first net zero school in Massachusetts. It's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, for those who aren't familiar. And there's several sustainability components that are part of the net zero and the overall health and wellness of the building that we really wanted to incorporate through the educational graphics. So certain things, as I mentioned, related to net zero, like the geothermal systems, the roof mounted, as well as the facade mounted photovoltaics that generate renewable energy. We're also harvesting rainwater and reusing it in the building. And we're doing a lot with the site to reduce stormwater runoff, to collect it, infiltrate that, to reduce heat island effect. And those are some components that we want to highlight throughout the building. We're just going to look at a short video here that shows you kind of what that overall building looks like. This particular project is about 273,000 square feet, has 3 schools. So there's an elementary school, a middle school, and a preschool program that are all specifically uniquely in the space separated. And then there's shared spaces like gyms and cafeteria and things like that. There's also a public library, a public pool, and the district administration for the Cambridge Public Schools. So there's a lot of components that are going throughout the building and a very focus on community and learning. So the graphics are really important to understand how can we sort of incorporate them, as Jen mentioned, into the architecture so they are part of the building. Also understanding maintenance and things might change over time. So how can we incorporate that to really enhance the learning environment? So this is just going to give you a little bit of an overview of the project and the different spaces throughout the building. There's also a large public art component, as you saw the yellow thing that was hanging in the cafeteria. So there's site artwork as well as artwork in the building that we really wanted to incorporate through the graphics and through the project as well.
So as Kate mentioned, integration is really important in making sure that where we're placing these graphics really makes sense. So when doing that, it's really important to get your graphic designer on board early, to start these discussions early in the project with the architects and the interior designers and the client, and to identify these spaces that will make sense for the graphics. You don't need to know what they're going to be, you don't need to know all of the details, but making sure that you designate these spaces early on is really important to help coordination and making sure that these spaces are designated and nothing else gets placed on these areas. So here at King Open, we identified some of these breakout spaces right outside of the classrooms as good opportunities for graphics. You can see one here in the corner. Here's another one of the graphics in one of the breakout spaces. You can see also hierarchy was very important when putting these graphics together. So we have the large wall graphics that are placed on the wall that can be viewed from very far away. And while each of them has its own story and identity, the graphic language remains consistent throughout all of them. So they make sure that they feel consistent throughout all of the spaces. And again, building on that hierarchy of information, in addition to the large wall graphic, there's a small plaque next to each one of these wall graphics that gives more detailed information. So students can come up and read more detailed information on the wall graphics. The information on each of these plaques is written in the same way. It has the same order of information so that anytime you go to one of these graphics, you're getting the same pieces of information. And it's also organized in a way that can help both young learners and adults really read and get information out of it. So it talks about what is it? What is the big concept that we're talking about? What does this building do? What does King Open Building do? And then what can you take home to do too as well? That's something we find very important to give students, especially action items that they can take home with them and bring into their everyday lives so that these become sustainable habits that they keep with them wherever they go. We also adjusted the topics per grade level. So on the younger end, the kindergarten area, they're talking about turning off the lights, something very simple that's easy for them to understand. And as they go up to the 8th grade level, they talk about geothermal and ground source heat pumps, some of the more complicated concepts. So really making sure that you're placing these graphics in areas that make sense and targeting them to the audience that's going to be seeing them the most is important as well. Again, with placement, putting things where people can actually take action is very important. So here in the cafeteria, next to the area where the students separate their trays at the end of their meal, we have a graphic about composting and learning how to compost. So again, at that moment of decision where they're making the choice to throw something away or compost it, we have that graphic there educating them on the importance of composting and how that happens.
It's changed the typing. Yeah, so what you do is change.
I think there's somebody who hasn't muted. If you could just mute, that would be great.
But I can't see. So right now this comes to type, and I always have to go over and then come back.
Yes, sorry. Lost my chain of thought there. Jenna was showing you a lot of the more fixed or stationary graphics throughout the building. We've also incorporated them digitally. So throughout the building, in the different spaces like the schools, the community area where community can rent and kind of come in and use auditorium gyms. And also in the public library, there's these large dashboards that incorporate a lot of the same graphics and information so that if someone isn't necessarily walking through every grade level of the school, they still have access to that information. It can also be pulled up, on a tablet or other ways, but when they're in the building, there's also these digital boards. So really trying to make that connection graphically between all of those pieces. And, working with our graphics team here, we were able to digitize these and put them into the building dashboard that the school district uses. And then, of course, within that dashboard, it is collecting data about the water use, the energy use, the renewables generation of the project. So you can find a lot more information in those digital pieces that kind of build upon some of the static information and educational signage. And then outside the building as well, as I mentioned, there's a lot of components that we're talking about that are part of the site. And so we wanted to make sure that we were doing educational components throughout the site. So a couple of areas that we highlighted those are where we really want to talk about the rainwater reuse. And we also wanted to talk about the school and the community garden and sort of what is local food, how do you grow your own food, and what's the sustainable component of that.
So as Kate said here in the water garden, a lot of times people won't notice it or won't know what a water garden is. So here we're able to add just a very simple plaque next to this pump the pump will attract kids, especially people over to interact with the water garden. And then we have this very simple plaque that tells them what it is, why it's here, why it's important. Really having these simple moments again just brings that information to the forefront and gives people the opportunity to learn about why these decisions are made in this space. Again, here in the courtyard, area where obviously kids come and play a lot, but we do have the community gardens here in the back. And again, next to these community gardens, we have a very similar plaque that talks about what it is, what is done specifically at this building, and again, what can you do to take this home? Always bringing that user engagement and making sure that people know how they can apply these principles to their everyday lives.
So one of the other projects we wanted to share is a project that opened last fall, is the Douglas and Gates Elementary School, also known now as the Boardwalk Campus. It's in Acton. It's for the Acton-Bucksboro Regional School District. And this particular project is actually quite similar to King Open in that it is a multiple schools housed in the same building. So there's 2 elementary schools in here as well as a preschool. So again, there's this lots of different components happening in the same building, which we see more and more with buildings like schools and other community focused buildings. This particular project is also net zero energy and net zero water. So those were 2 large components that we wanted to talk about, or that the district wanted to talk about in terms of the educational components and the graphical components. The building itself is situated on a site behind sort of a suburban neighborhood. It's bordered by a brook to the, you can see top right on the plan. And really the building site is quite constrained between the neighborhood and the brook. But we have this great area of wetlands that are behind the school where we weren't able to construct or build, but we really wanted to incorporate that sort of natural environment into the school building and into the graphics. Biophilic design was really important for this project, especially incorporating that ecology and the wetlands behind the school. And that inspired sort of the way that both the graphics are that Jenna will talk about in a second, but also the way that the interior material palettes were set up as well. So borrowing from some of the seasonal characteristics and colors, the 3-story school is basically designed around being the first floor is sort of the ground level, the second floor is more green, and that's the tree canopy, and then the 3rd floor is blue and sort of reminiscent of the sky. And so really trying to inherently put the piece of the design component that we're pulling from the land and the surrounding context through the building, both architecturally and graphically, and merging those 2 together was really important.
So at Douglas and Gates, there is a very large signage program that supports and highlights all of these sustainable aspects of the building. The graphics go inside, outside, and cover a large range of topics. So we wanted to make sure that all of the signage really felt like it belonged. So we created this system of icons and a graphic style so that we could carry through all of the signage throughout the building so that it all felt of the same nature, even though it was vastly different content on each of the different signs. Collaboration was also key in developing all of the signage here. The signs that you're looking at right now are in the landscape. So we worked with the landscape architects to understand why they chose the plants that they did. Ultimately, we decided to showcase the plantings in the 3 different uses that they have. So plants as medicine, plants as food, and plants as filtration for that very important filtration system as water is flowing into the neighboring wetlands. And these smaller plaques were placed at the locations of these plantings. So again, students could actually be reading about these different types of plants while actually looking at the plant so they can make that connection between information and the physical space. Another key collaboration was with the solar company and the district's energy manager. This is a very complex solar system with a battery storage system, and the school really wanted to use this as a teaching tool as well. So we worked with them to take these concepts and distill them into the 2 plaques that you see at the top of the page here, and talking about, in very simplified terms, how we can explain how the system works. These plaques will be installed on the fence. It's going to surround the battery storage system. So that way it's accessible to the public who's walking the campus. And they also hope to use this as an educational tool for tours that are going to be happening throughout the building. We also have a sign for the geothermal system out where the geothermal wells were drilled. And with all of these signs, especially in the exterior, we're trying to find a balance between explaining how the general system works and giving some general information about how geothermal and solar energy systems work, and also giving statistics on the actual project itself. So talking about how many wells were drilled here, how many solar panels there are, so that you have that connection back to the actual school as well. As Kate pointed out, the wetlands were extremely important to this site and are an extremely important teaching tool for the school. So we have a series of plaques in the wetlands that students can read, and while they're connecting with nature, they can get this information. And you're going to see too, a lot of the themes of the wetlands are brought into the building as well.
I'll just point out on this slide, because I forgot to mention this on the overall sort of aerial of the building, you can see that snake-like roof structure that's at the bottom of the page. So there was an existing boardwalk that we were able to widen and expand and have more accessibility on it on the same footprint. And this is a community path that, you know, teachers and staff and students use throughout the day, but also the community uses it to walk from, you know, basically one side to the other side of the brook. And so that was an existing really important feature that we kept and really were able to enhance through graphics. And Jenna will talk about this a little bit more on the next slide, of bringing that really to the community. And when you exit the boardwalk towards the school side, there's a learning walk or learning trail that they call it, that goes all the way around the school building that really kind of connects all of these components of graphic signage on the outside.
So as Kate was saying, this boardwalk is very important to the community. So we wanted to add some signage to the boardwalk, and we decided that this would be a great way to get the kids involved. So the 5th grade classroom actually studied the flora and fauna of the surrounding wetlands, and they picked a handful of different flowers and trees that they could illustrate. So we took these illustrations and turned them into plaques that are now integrated into the structure of the boardwalk. So as they walk down, they can see their contribution to the project mounted on the boardwalk. They also wanted this to be a living project and continue to grow and evolve with the students. So they have plans to create a website. So that's the QR code that you see here, so that they can continue to add and learn and grow and provide that information for the community and really make this part of the curriculum of the school moving forward. And all of these elements were brought into the school as well in a number of different ways. So here you're seeing some of the fun wall coverings that were included throughout the space. So at each of the entrances to the restrooms, we included a patterned wall covering, custom wall covering that had the different flora drawn on it. And then we also used the natural flora and fauna as identification for each of the school classrooms. We worked with the director of the science curriculum of the school to identify what plants and flowers each grade level was going to be studying that year.
Animals and insects.
Animals and insects, yes. So we turned those into custom graphics, and we installed those on each of the classrooms so that students could have a little bit more fun. Rather than saying they're in room 102, they can say they're in the dragonfly room, and it just makes it a little bit more fun to walk into your classroom. All of these icons then come together in a 2-story tree mural. So this is both physically and kind of conceptually where the schools come together. So they all come together to form this mural. Students can come and find their classroom icon in the overall mural as well, so they can kind of identify where they are and see all of their friends in the different classes as well. As Kate was saying, this is 2 elementary schools that were combined into one, and we really wanted to be sensitive to make sure that there's equity between the 2 schools. And one of the ways that we did that was making sure that each school had equal graphics from floor to floor. Here, the Gates School is all on the 2nd floor, and the Douglas School is all on the 3rd floor, and everything was repeated from floor to floor. So you can see the large tree mural, everybody walks by it for both schools, and then the Douglas students go all the way up to the 3rd floor, and they're welcomed by a series of graphics, and the Gates School gets off on the 2nd floor. And again, all of the icons, all of the graphics are equal from floor to floor to make sure that we are equitable with the school services. We also have educational graphics all over the building as well. There is a 3-story glass curtain wall that we use to tell the story of the rainwater collection system throughout the building. So on the left-hand photo here, you can see we have a little bit about the solar panels because there will be solar panels installed here. So students, again, can stand here, read the information about the solar panels, and actually look out and see the solar panels on the roof. We also talked about the rainwater. So here we talk about how much rainwater is collected on the roof. And again, you can stand here, see that information and see the rain being collected on the roof. On the second floor, which isn't pictured here, we talk about the water use in the building and the day tank that is used for toilet flushing and non-potable water, and then also the water coming in from the city for drinking. And then at the ground floor, talk about how rain and water hits the ground. So we have an informational panel here on the wetlands and how important they are, the rain gardens and the effect that they have on the water, and then also the rainwater cistern. So the cistern that is installed underground right out under the playground here, they can learn about the rainwater system and also just how important it is to think about your water and how you're using it. In addition, on the first floor, kind of main gathering space for the students, we thought that that was a great space for educational graphics. It's where everybody comes in. It's a common space, so everybody has access to it. So we have a series of panels that talk about the net zero components of the building. We worked with the teachers at the school to make sure that all of the text that we're including here is familiar to the students and can be used as part of their curriculum, and making sure that we use plain language and words that are easy for them to understand. And again, making sure that we include action items for students so that not only do they understand what the building is doing, but they also understand what impact they have and what habits they can take home with them. On the other side of this Learning Commons, we have information on building health as well, so students can understand that materials and access to light is very important to them. And then very similar to the King Open project, there is a digital dashboard here that gives real-time information about the rainwater system. It will give information about the PV panels and the solar system that's installed. And then we wanted to pair this with a physical graphic around the dashboard so that students can start to connect the digital information that they're seeing with the actual physical locations of where they can go out and see these pieces around the campus.
The third project that we're going to show is another school. It's Hildreth Elementary School in Harvard, Massachusetts. So this particular project is in a fairly rural part of Massachusetts. Harvard has a really long history of an agrarian community and understanding the importance of nature and ecology in their local surrounding setting. And so we wanted to bring that into the project as part of the graphics and really supporting this as, again, it's a school and it's a community building. It is used by the community, during non-school hours. And so that was really important to connect, again, the community, but also thinking about how that community sits sort of in the larger world. So you'll see as Jenna walks through the graphics, that was a really overarching goal.
Yes, as Kate said, the graphic that you're looking at right here, it points out Harvard as the center and then its connection to all the different major spaces throughout the world. And again, this is very much used as a teaching tool for the students as well. So teachers can bring their students to this wall and point out some of the major different biomes and different areas of the world and use this to enhance their curriculum. In addition to the world map, we have a very close focus on the town of Harvard. Since this was in a very highly trafficked area that students would be walking by time and time again, it was an opportunity to put in a lot of very detailed information as well. So you don't need to get all of the information all at once. The thought is that students pass by this every day and hopefully see something new and interesting every time they pass through. So here it was a focused in map on the town of Harvard, talking about the trees and the landmarks of the neighborhood and the area so that kids can come here, see the diagrams, see the illustrations, and then go out into the community and find these things in the real world as well. Again, used plants and birds and insects as identification for the different classrooms. Again, it just adds that bit of whimsy while also getting some educational moments in there as well for the students. It just makes it much more fun than a simple room number. The next project we're going to look at is the Boston Public Library in the East Boston branch. This project kind of shows that all buildings, no matter their scale, can have an opportunity to educate. Here, there was a series of rain gardens that were designed and installed in the front of the building that a lot of times would go unnoticed by most people. But by placing very simple plaques, you're able to call out attention to these rain gardens and educate again these moments for the community. So there's a series of very brightly colored plaques within the landscape that really draw the eye and get people excited to come over and read the information on the plaques. One thing to think about when you're putting plaques like this into a public setting is how you want to break up the story. Understanding that most people aren't probably going to go through and read every single plaque. So how can you get enough of the story in each one so that they can get a complete picture without having to go and read everything, but also not repeating yourself, so that if and when they do finally read all of them, they're getting a different piece of information in each section that they're going through. And again, putting these pieces of information at the decision point. So talking about stormwater right next to where the stormwater is being collected, making people think about their decisions that they're making in the moment. Also, in working in exterior settings, especially, you get to work with a variety of different materials usually. And it's really important to think about how you can connect all of the different materials together and still make it feel like one and the same project. So here we used color. That bright orange was used in the plaques and was also used in the etching of the pavers in the ground to help connect it so that people know that it's all part of the same visual system, the same storytelling system, and they can go around and get more information. So now a little bit about kind of the practical side of how you can incorporate these principles and this signage into your projects. First, talk about understanding the cost. So for new construction projects, the budget for graphics is minuscule. It's such a small percentage of the overall cost of the building. Do keep in mind that this 0.0004% to 1% is construction cost for fabrication and installation of the graphics. It does not include design fees. Design fees can range greatly based on the type of graphics that you're proposing. Things that are custom definitely have a lot more time to create than some more off-the-shelf pieces. And just a real-world example, going back to the King Open School, the overall construction budget was $130 million. The graphics were only $78,000 of that. So again, when you're talking about a full project, the cost of adding this graphic is very, very small, yet the impact can be very, very large. It really showcases all of those things that are in that budget that otherwise you wouldn't notice.
And that covers, for that particular project, it covers a lot of graphics and signage that we didn't show, things that are not necessarily part of the educational component to that, including exterior signage and those kinds of things.
For interior renovations, costs can vary greatly since signage can be, a much greater portion of the project. It can be 20% or more, but that just all depends on the scope of the project and what all is being done. So this is where getting your graphic designer to come in early in the project and understand what that scope is, you can help to make the scope match the fee that you have. How do you ensure success for all these projects? Talks about a lot of things, including getting your designers involved early. But once you're into the construction, how do we make sure that it is successful? Like with everything in design, assume adjustments will need to be made. Nothing is going to stay the same from day one to the end. A real world application of this was back at the King Open. We had that compost graphic. Originally, it was slated to be installed on these two half walls that were facing the windows here. And it was a graphic that was supposed to be split up onto these two spaces. The graphic had been completely fabricated. It was all ready to go. The installers went in and discovered that there were obstructions there, and that was no longer a viable space to install this graphic.
There actually weren't obstructions. The graphics weren't in day one when it opened. And then, 8 months later, we had a pandemic and they installed hand washing sinks, rightfully so, on these walls. So just, that's also something to think about is graphics a lot of times are sort of at the end of construction, right? So always making sure that you're prepared that something could possibly change before they actually go in.
Yeah. But since this graphic had already been fabricated, we wanted to find a space for it. So we looked at all the other wall surfaces and we were able to find a wall over here in the cafeteria above this window, and with very minor adjustments, able to install this all as one graphic in one space and make use of that graphic that had already been produced, already been designed, and really wanted to be kept as part of the overall scheme. This one is an important one. Make sure your walls are prepped properly. A lot of what we do is wall coverings on drywall. So making sure that those walls are properly prepared is very, very important. So all your walls should have a level 5 finish. That just means they're super nice and smooth, properly sanded and cleaned. Making sure that you have 2 coats of primer and 2 coats of paint is very, very important. Getting that drywall sealed is very important to the adherence of the wall graphic to that wall. And make sure that that paint has plenty of time to cure. If the paint doesn't cure properly, you can have a lot of problems with the wall graphics not adhering to the wall. If using low VOC paint, make sure you're allowing extra drying time. When low VOC paints were first coming out, there was a lot of debate. A lot of installers wouldn't install graphics over low VOC paint. It is possible, it just needs extra drying time, and you need to clean the walls with a solution of alcohol and water to make sure that you have the proper prepping. And you should also test all of the products. So most vendors do this now, but you can take a little corner of the actual either film or wallpaper that you're installing, put it on the wall in an inconspicuous place and make sure that it doesn't fall off, make sure that it adheres the way you want it to adhere. This takes a little bit of extra time, but in the long run, it's way better to take the time to do that and make sure it works than to have your graphics fall off the walls a week after you install them. Coordinate your devices. Again, a lot of our wall graphics go on these big, beautiful walls, and the last thing you want is a fire strobe in the middle of your wall graphic, which is almost what happened in this in one of these schools here. You can see this is a construction photo. We had a graphic planned for the space between these 2 doors going into the classrooms here. And when they were doing a site walk, they discovered that there was a hole here, probably for a fire strobe or some sort of device that was supposed to be installed there. Thankfully, the architect on the project knew that there was a graphic going there, so they flagged it, they brought it back, figured out where that obstruction could be moved, so that once the graphic was installed, it was a nice, beautiful graphic, and we didn't have that obstruction in that space. Here, the partnership between the graphic designer and the architect architect walking the space is very important. A lot of times, as graphic designers, we're not on site nearly as much as the architects are. So having that conversation and making sure that they understand what those important spaces are, what those walls are, so that they can keep an eye out for things like light switches and other obstructions, and making those moves whenever possible is very important.
And that's why, getting back to what Jenna said earlier, is the sooner that you can plan for graphics, even if you don't know what they are in terms of visuals, is really important, because then you can flag those things for the contractor. On your plans, you can flag it, when you're pre-meetings with the contractor, so they know that there will be graphics going on there. Because sometimes things show up on walls that are not supposed to be there, and they were supposed to be somewhere else. And if everyone kind of knows that ahead of time, because sometimes graphics do tend to be one of those things that are like, we have a budget, but we might still wait till the end. And so you're doing the design and coming up with the final graphics when construction might be starting, especially when construction is a multi-year project. So it's really important to have those flagged, have them, on your elevations, have a dashed line or something that indicates that this has been reserved for graphics, so that people are aware of that in the construction field.
On the flip side of that, sometimes you can actually use things in the walls to enhance your graphics. So here they have a displacement vent that was actually used as part of the graphics, talking about how that fresh air is coming in. So you can also be creative in your use of things that are in the walls as well. And then protect your work. Put all of this time and effort and finances into installing this. Make sure you're doing protecting it. One of the simplest, easiest things you can do is adding corner guards, adding them on all the corners to make sure that kids aren't going up and picking and peeling at the edges. All wall graphics can also have a film put on top of them to protect them. It helps with cleaning, maintenance, and just really makes it a lot more durable. So think about that too when you're specifying and doing your drawings. And then finally, just be curious and have fun. A lot of these graphics came up because we asked why and how. And it's a lot of fun to work with different people to help tell their stories. A lot of people love putting graphics in because it does showcase their work in a way that normally doesn't happen. So ask questions, work with others, and have fun. So, are there any questions?
Well, we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions. One other thing that we didn't have in this presentation that might be useful to talk about is some of the materials. And as we're thinking more about sustainability, specifically environmental graphics, like what work you've been doing kind of around that.
Yeah, so a lot of what we do are wall graphics, which traditionally were always vinyl, which obviously we don't love vinyl in our projects. More and more fabricators are coming up with non-vinyl wall graphic solutions, films that can be applied in the same manner. 3M has a great product now that can be used, and other smaller manufacturers are also coming up with very durable graphic materials that can be custom printed and installed in ways and really eliminate that PVC and that vinyl from the project. There are even optically clear films now, which was kind of the big hurdle, was making something that you can print on to apply to those windows. A lot of the window graphics, like we saw in Douglas and Gates, there are non-PVC versions of those materials now that you can specify. That's really much better than the traditional vinyl.
So I see some questions in the chat. So maybe you want to take the last one about like, how are you producing the graphics and how does it get printed?
Yeah. So we produce everything in Illustrator mostly. So all of our graphics are all produced on the computer. We tend to do them at scale. So a lot of what we showed you today was vector, so it was very easy to scale up. But anytime you do large graphics, you really want to think about resolution and making sure that you're remembering that these are very large walls that things are being printed on. So making sure that anything that you produce can be blown up to that scale and printed properly. From there, we take typically Illustrator files that are half scale or quarter scale and send them to a signage fabricator. And they will take our files, print samples for us first to make sure that the colors are being produced properly. Some of the biggest hurdles a lot of times is color, making sure that the color on the computer matches the final print. So we usually go through several rounds of making sure that that matches. And then finally, the fabricator will print very large panels and go out and install the large panels, much like wallpaper in the field.
How early in the design process do you get involved?
A lot of times after the building has gone through design development and is almost construction drawings, we'll have those initial conversations about identifying the walls, identifying the spaces that want graphics, making sure that those are documented before construction documents go out. Like Kate was saying, just putting those dashed boxes that say graphics going here. At that point, we very rarely know what the content's going to be, what the graphic style is going to be, but we at least have placeholders in the space for those pieces. And then once construction documents have gone out, that's when we really start having the conversations with the client to understand what content do we want, what's the style, what's the theme. And it's at that point that we really start to develop the actual content.
And then I think the last question was when does it get installed? The night before the opening?
Yes. Oftentimes the night before the ribbon cutting is when things get installed. That's also when mistakes happen. So we try to get it done slightly before that. It definitely happens after everything else is done because you need your walls to be prepped. You need that cure time. So it's after all of that happens. A lot of times graphics isn't installed until after the occupants move in. And for like Douglas and Gates, there's still pieces being installed now because the landscape needed to be done before some of those exterior elements could be installed. So it's often a rolling schedule and it's often well after major construction is complete. Yeah, and I just say, we also need it to be very clean, right? So there's also yes. practical reasons why it doesn't happen in the middle of construction, because especially with any sort of graphic that's going on the wall, being applied to the wall, that needs to be, pretty clean, dust-free. Sometimes we have done paint graphics. So on King Open, to identify the floors and the grade levels, I think there was an image in there that had a big circle with a 2 on it, right? That was sort of a floor indicator. Those were painted. And so they actually, because that was the same sub that's doing regular paint, that was done, earlier. And then, you have to obviously protect that. It's pretty durable from kids being in there, but not contractors hitting it with a ladder and poking a hole through the wall. So, if you do things earlier, you have to make sure you're potentially protecting them from construction. Seeing these last ones, yes, all of the graphics do count for CHIPS credits. That was a big component of the Douglas and Gates School, was that educational component for the CHIPS. And yes, we also get pushbacks on cost every time. You're always going to get pushback on cost. Having champions really helps, both within the design team and on the client side. So for Douglas and Gates, we were very fortunate to have designers within our office that really saw the value and brought that to the client early on and showed them through some of our previous work, the value that it brought. And then the client really bought in and really made sure to keep the budget in there for us as well, to make sure that we were able to continue those graphics all the way through to the end. And we were really focusing on sustainability graphics today, ones that talked about sustainable aspects or equity aspects. But obviously we're doing other types of graphics that are, whether it's a school or a different type of building, that are really sort of enhancing their mission. So I think, we've seen where it was a little bit more of a struggle, say 5 to 10 years ago, it hasn't really been now, because we have a lot of examples of how it's really enhanced the indoor environment for our buildings. And so that's something that clients really have started to see the value in that, because they can physically go see it, either one of their other buildings. And so they know that they want to do that again. So seeing is believing sometimes, right? So I think that has been a huge component of really us sort of in our interdisciplinary practice here of being able to incorporate graphics on a lot of our projects, even beyond sort of the educational or sustainable graphic components. So educational value of graphics is a perfect match for schools. Do you anticipate other building types see value, and do they add value to the project? Yes, like you said, obviously schools are very focused on this, but we do have other civic and spaces where this makes sense. We're currently working with a museum in Rhode Island that has signage throughout their gardens. So again, it's places where you kind of expect to see it, but also places where it's accessible to the public is really where they see value to it. So it's anywhere that you can promote it for the public and get the message out there like Kate was saying, more and more as people are seeing this, they see value in it and they're putting more emphasis on it. So I think the more we see, the more kind of snowballs and the more we can continue to do it.
Right. And I think it's doing two things, right? It's enhancing the interior design of the space and there's an educational component. And I think that having those two things be together, sort of beauty, if you will, of the graphics, how much it enhances the space, and then it's layering in education. That's really important. People aren't as likely to go over and read, I don't know what the right word is, but a plaque that looks like really long and boring, and I'm not going to necessarily take my time to go over there and read that sort of just basic plaque. I think it really is about having it be more integrated into the space. We've done this on library projects, including the Boston Public Library and the main branch. So many of you probably have been there and sort of seen some of those graphics in the children's area, teen areas, and other components of that building. And that's a really good example of combining sort of like the fun, the indoor environment, sort of the feeling of the space with educational components as well. And we've done that and I think are sort of seeing more of this in even office space, where in the past, yeah, you could get a LEED credit for green building education, but it was sort of doing it as like a standalone thing and not as incorporated. And again, it's like once you make it much more incorporated into the design of the space, there's many value points there of why to do it. So we're seeing that more.
Also, corporations just kind of want to show off sometimes, and they've put a lot of money into these systems. And if you can spend just a little bit more and tell people about it, they do see a value in that.
Yeah. Have we missed any questions?
Do we do all the artwork ourselves? Yes, for all of the projects that we showed today, all of that artwork was created in-house.
Oh, okay. I think we have covered all the questions. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Kate. This has been a wonderful presentation.